Imagine the crushing pressure of the abyss pressing against your titanium hull, while rhythmic sonar pings reveal something massive moving just beyond the light. These unidentified shadows are brushing against the cabin, and as the oxygen hums, you realize you aren't alone. Sink into the blackness and let the terror drift you into sleep.
Chapter 1. Pressure Depth.
The descent always began with a lie.
Mara Ellison told herself she liked the silence, that she preferred the deep to the surface, that the ocean floor was the only place where her thoughts stopped clawing at her. But as the Bathurst Vantage slipped past 6,000 meters, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, not yet. More like anticipation, an animal sense that something was waiting below. The cabin lights dimmed automatically as the external light sensors registered total darkness. The world outside the viewport dissolved into a void so complete it felt physical, like a velvet curtain pressed against the glass.
Mara exhaled slowly.
She had trained for sensory deprivation. She had practiced meditation in sealed rooms, floated in isolation tanks, spent nights in anechoic chambers where her heartbeat became a drum in her skull. But nothing prepared a person for the abyss. At 7,000 meters, the hum of the thruster softened. The water grew denser, swallowing sound. Her ears popped. The cabin creaked. She whispered into the recorder. Beginning phase 2. Visual contact, none. Acoustic environment, stable. Emotional state, steady. A lie.
Her voice trembled. She adjusted the sonar. The ping echoed through the hull, a soft metallic chirp that returned as a faint ghostly outline of the terrain below. It was the only sense she had left, her only window.
Ping, return. Ping, return.
The rhythm soothed her. It always did. A heartbeat outside her own.
She closed her eyes.
The first fracture.
At 8,200 meters, the cabin temperature dropped. Condensation formed on the inside of the viewport, blurring the blackness beyond. Mara wiped it away with her sleeve. Her reflection stared back, pale, hollow-eyed, distorted by the curve of the glass. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. She blinked. The reflection blinked a fraction of a second too late. Her breath hitched. She leaned closer. The glass fogged again, and when she wiped it clean, her reflection behaved normally. She told herself it was fatigue. She told herself she was imagining things. But the seed had been planted. The abyss had noticed her.
The weight of silence.
At 9,000 meters, the thrusters cut automatically. The submersible drifted, suspended in a darkness so complete it felt like being buried alive. Mara listened.
Nothing. Not the hum of the ocean.
Not the groan of the hull. Not even her own breathing. The silence was so absolute, it felt wrong, like a missing limb. She whispered. Audio environment, unusually still. Her voice sounded foreign in the cabin, too loud, too sharp. She swallowed hard. The sonar pinged again.
Ping.
No return.
She frowned, adjusted the gain, tried again.
Ping.
Nothing.
Her pulse quickened.
She tapped the console. The system was functional. The transmitter was firing. But the abyss wasn't answering. It was listening. The first tap. At 10,100 meters, Mara felt the pressure in her skull shift. A subtle tightening behind the eyes. She blinked hard, trying to clear the sensation.
Then, tap.
A soft, delicate knock on the forward viewport. Her breath froze. She waited.
Tap, tap,
Tap.
3 taps. A pause.
3 again.
A human rhythm.
Her throat closed. She reached for the sonar controls with trembling fingers.
Ping.
Still nothing. She whispered. If something's out there, it knows where the glass is. The tapping stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. Mara pressed her palm to the viewport. The glass was cold, too cold, as if something on the other side was drawing the warmth from it. She pulled her hand back. A faint outline of her palm remained on the glass. 5 smudges where her fingers had been. Then a 6th smudge appeared.
Lower. Smaller.
Not hers. She recoiled, heart hammering. The smudge faded slowly, as if whatever made it had withdrawn. Mara whispered, beginning ascent. Another lie. She wasn't escaping. She was being allowed to leave. The ascent should have comforted her. It didn't. As the Bathurst Vantage rose past 10,000 meters, Mara felt the pressure ease on the hull, but not on her chest. Her breathing stayed shallow, her fingers trembling on the controls. She kept glancing at the viewport. The glass looked normal, untouched, blank. But she couldn't shake the memory of that 6th fingerprint. Small, misplaced, impossibly human. She whispered into the recorder. Beginning ascent. No further contact. Another lie. She could feel the contact, even in its absence. The abyss had touched her. And it wasn't finished. The tapping returns. At 9,800 meters, the sonar flickered back to life.
Ping. Return.
The return signal was faint, distorted, as if bouncing off something soft rather than solid. Mara leaned closer to the console, adjusting the gain. The return pulse sharpened. Something was behind her. She turned slowly toward the aft viewport. Nothing.
Just blackness. Then,
Tap.
A single gentle knock on the rear glass. Her throat tightened. She forced herself to breathe.
Tap. Tap.
2 more.
closer this time.
She whispered. It's following me. The words tasted wrong. Speaking them made them real. She reached for the cabin lights, turning them up to full brightness. The interior flooded with harsh white light, bleaching the shadows from every corner. The tapping stopped. For a moment,
Then,
Tap.
on the forward viewport again, as if whatever was outside had moved instantly from the back of the sub to the front. Mora's pulse hammered in her ears. She whispered, "You're not real." The abyss disagreed.
the voice in the static.
At 9,200 meters, the radio crackled.
A burst of static.
Then another. Then a faint rhythmic pattern 3 short bursts, a pause, 3 more.
The same rhythm as the tapping.
Mara's hand shook as she adjusted the frequency. The static sharpened, forming something almost like a whisper. Not words,
Not language, but intent.
A sound like breath drawn through teeth.
She recoiled from the speaker. Her mind raced. She knew the science. Sound doesn't travel from outside the hole to the inside. The radio was a closed system. The tapping couldn't be transmitted through it. Unless it wasn't coming from outside. Unless it was coming from the sub itself. She whispered, "Stop. Please stop." The static softened.
Almost soothing, like someone exhaling against her ear.
The cabin lights flicker.
At 8,700 meters, the lights dimmed. Just a flicker at first.
A brief pulse of darkness.
Mara froze. The lights steadied. She exhaled shakily. Then they flickered again, longer this time. The cabin plunged into shadow. The only illumination, the faint glow of the sonar screen. She reached for the emergency switch. The lights died completely. The darkness was absolute. She couldn't see her hands. She couldn't see the console. She couldn't see the glass. Her breath quickened. She felt the pressure of the dark pressing against her skin, as if the abyss had seeped into the cabin.
Then,
Tap.
Right in front of her face. She screamed, scrambling backward, hitting the rear bulkhead. Her hands searched blindly for the emergency switch.
Tap. Tap.
2 more, closer, as if something were leaning against the glass, listening for her movements. Her fingers found the switch. The lights snapped back on. The cabin was empty, but the glass was fogged again. 5 smudges where her fingers had been. And 1 more, lower, smaller, pressed from the inside. Mara's breath hitched. She whispered, "I'm not alone." The abyss agreed. The descent within the ascent. At 8,000 meters, Mara realized something was wrong with the depth gauge. She was ascending. She could feel the shift in buoyancy. She could hear the thrusters. But the gauge read 8,000 meters, 8,020 meters, 8,050 meters. Descending. Her stomach dropped. She tapped the gauge. It continued to climb. 8,100 meters, 8,150 meters. She checked the secondary gauge. Same reading. She checked the tertiary. Same. Her voice cracked. No. This isn't possible. The sub was rising. She knew it was rising. She could feel it. But every instrument insisted she was sinking deeper. The abyss wasn't letting her go. Or worse, it was inside her instruments, inside her perception, inside her. She whispered, "I want to go home." The sonar pinged. Ping. No return. The abyss whispered back. The cabin lights hummed faintly, as if struggling to stay alive. Mara kept her eyes fixed on them, terrified of the moment they might flicker again. The darkness had weight. It had intention. It had touched her.
She wasn't sure she could survive another blackout. The death gauge continued its impossible climb. 8,300 meters, 8,350 meters, 8,400 meters, descending. Her stomach twisted. She could feel the buoyancy shift with every meter gained. She was rising. She knew she was rising, but the numbers insisted she was sinking deeper. She whispered, "You lied." She wasn't sure if she meant the instruments or herself. The mirror that wasn't a mirror. At 8,200 meters, condensation formed again on the forward viewport. A thin mist, delicate as breath. Mara wiped it away with her sleeve. Her reflection stared back, but something was wrong. Her reflection's eyes were too wide, too dark, too still. She leaned closer. Her reflection didn't. It stayed perfectly still, watching her with a calm, unblinking stare.
Mara's breath hitched. She lifted her hand slowly, fingers trembling. Her reflection lifted its hand a heartbeat late. Not a mirror, a mimic. She stumbled backward, hitting the console. The lights flickered. The reflection vanished, replaced by the familiar black void. She pressed a shaking hand to her chest. I'm not losing my mind. Another lie. The abyss was peeling her open, layer by layer. The tapping inside the skull. At 7,900 meters, the tapping returned.
Not on the glass, not on the hull. Inside her head, a soft rhythmic pulse behind her left ear. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. She pressed her palms to her temples, teeth clenched. Stop, stop, stop. The tapping continued, gentle, patient, like a finger tracing the inside of her skull. Her vision blurred, the cabin tilted. She grabbed the edge of the console to steady herself.
The tapping grew louder, not painful, not violent, just insistent, as if trying to get her attention. She whispered, "What do you want?" The tapping stopped. Silence. Then a soft exhale brushed the back of her neck. She spun around. No one there. But the warmth lingered. The time drift. At 7,500 meters, Mara checked the mission clock. Elapsed time, 1 hour, 12 minutes. That couldn't be right.
She had been descending for over 3 hours. She had been ascending for at least 1. She checked her wristwatch. Elapsed time, 1 hour, 12 minutes.
She checked the backup clock.
1 hour, 12 minutes.
Her pulse quickened. Time wasn't moving. Or it was looping. Or she was. She whispered, "I'm losing track." The cabin lights dimmed slightly, as if in agreement. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. When she opened them, the mission clock read
1 hour, 11 minutes.
Time was going backward. Her throat tightened. No, no, no. The tapping resumed.
The whisper through the glass.
At 7,200 meters, the tapping shifted. It became softer,
Slower, almost tender.
Mara pressed her back against the bulkhead, staring at the viewport. A faint shape moved in the condensation.
A smear, a curve, a suggestion of a face pressed against the other side.
She blinked hard. The shape remained.
A mouth,
Open.
breathing.
The glass fogged with each exhale. Mara's breath caught in her throat. The shape whispered, Not words.
Not language, just a soft, wet sound, like lips brushing the glass.
She whispered back, "Please stop." The shape smiled. The condensation cleared. Nothing was there. But the whisper lingered in her ears, warm and close.
The descent of the mind.
At 7,000 meters, Mara realized she no longer trusted her senses. The instruments lied. The glass lied. Her reflection lied. Only the tapping felt real. It had a rhythm,
A pattern, a presence.
It was the only thing that hadn't abandoned her. She whispered, "Are you trying to talk to me?"
Silence.
Dan. Tap, tap, tap.
Her breath trembled. She whispered, "I don't understand." The tapping softened.
Tap,
Pause.
tap.
2 taps. A new pattern.
A reply.
Her pulse slowed. Her fears softened. For the first time, she felt something else beneath the terror.
Recognition.
The abyss wasn't attacking her. It was communicating. She leaned closer to the glass.
I'm listening.
The lights flickered. The tapping stopped. And something moved in the dark outside the viewport.
Slow, deliberate, impossibly close.
Mara didn't scream. She whispered, "I see you." The abyss whispered back. The cabin felt smaller. Mara wasn't sure when it had begun shrinking, whether the walls had moved or her perception had. But the space around her seemed to press inward, inch by inch, like a throat swallowing. She checked the depth gauge. 7,000 meters, 7,050 meters, 7,100 meters, descending. She pressed her palm to the console, feeling the vibration of the thrusters. They were pushing upward. She knew they were. She could feel the shift in buoyancy, the subtle lift in her stomach. But the numbers insisted she was sinking. Her mind split down the middle. One half whispered, "You're rising." The other half whispered, "You're falling." Both halves felt true. She whispered, "I need to focus." But the word focus felt slippery, like trying to hold water in her hands. The cabin that rearranged itself. At 6,900 meters, Mara noticed the first change. The emergency kit was on the wrong wall. She stared at it, heart pounding. She remembered fastening it to the port wall before launch. She remembered checking the straps twice. She remembered the weight of it in her hands. Now it hung on the starboard wall.
She blinked hard. The lights flickered. The kit was back on the port wall. Her breath trembled. She whispered, "I'm not imagining this." But she wasn't sure. The cabin felt like a stage set being rearranged between blinks.
The voice that knew her name. At 6,700 meters, the radio crackled again. Static at first, then a faint, rhythmic pulse. 3 bursts. Pause. 3 more. The tapping's rhythm. Mara leaned closer, pulse racing.
The static shifted, forming something almost like a whisper, a shape of a word. Her name, Myra. She jerked back, slamming into the bulkhead. Her breath came in sharp, ragged bursts. No, that's not real. That's not. The radio whispered again.
Mara. Her name stretched thin as if spoken through water. She reached for the power switch with shaking hands. The radio whispered a third time. Don't. She froze. Her fingers hovered over the switch. Her voice softened. Stay. Her hand fell away from the console. She didn't remember deciding to obey.
The reflection that moved first.
At 6,500 meters, the condensation returned to the viewport. Mara wiped it away with her sleeve. Her reflection stared back. But it wasn't her reflection. The eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, too still. She lifted her hand slowly. Her reflection lifted its hand first. Not a mirror.
A presence.
She stumbled backward, heart hammering. The reflection smiled. Her lips did not move. She whispered, "Stop." The reflection tilted its head, studying her with a calm, curious expression. Then it lifted its hand and tapped the glass from the inside.
Tap.
Mara screamed. The reflection vanished. The glass was clear, but her scream echoed too long, as if the cabin were larger than before.
The memory that didn't belong to her.
At 6,300 meters, Mara felt a sudden warmth in her chest. A memory surfaced, unbidden, vivid, impossible. She was standing on a beach at dusk. Waves lapped at her ankles. A child laughed behind her. A small hand slipped into hers. She turned. A little girl with dark hair smiled up at her. Mara's breath caught. She didn't have a daughter. She had never been to that beach. But the memory felt real. Too real. She whispered, "Whose memory is that?" The cabin creaked softly, like something shifting its weight. The tapping resumed.
Tap. Tap. Tap.
She pressed her hands to her temples. "Get out of my head." The tapping softened.
Tap.
Pause.
Tap. 2 taps. A reply.
Her pulse slowed. The abyss wasn't showing her hallucinations. It was showing her itself.
The moment she stopped fighting.
At 6,000 meters, Mara realized she no longer knew which sensations were real. The cabin lights flickered. Or maybe they didn't. The tapping echoed. Or maybe it was her heartbeat. The reflection smiled. Or maybe she did. Her mind felt porous, like the abyss had seeped into the cracks. She whispered, "What do you want from me?"
Silence.
Then, a soft exhale against her ear.
Wall. Human. Close.
She didn't turn. She didn't scream. She whispered.
I'm listening.
The abyss whispered back. Not through the glass. Not through the radio. Not through the tapping. Inside her mind.
A single word.
Deeper. The depth gauge flickered. 6,000 meters. 6,050 meters. 6,100 meters.
Descending.
Mara closed her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't know whether she wanted to rise. The cabin felt alive. Mara didn't notice it at first.
She thought the subtle expansion and contraction of the walls was just her pulse pounding in her ears. But as she steadied her breathing, the movement continued, slow, rhythmic, like the hole itself was inhaling. She pressed her palm to the metal. Warm. Not the warmth of machinery, the warmth of skin. She jerked her hand back. Her mind whispered, hallucination. Her body whispered, run. But there was nowhere to run. The Ba'thist Vantage was a coffin with thrusters. The first physical shift. At 5,900 meters, the cabin lights flickered again. Mara braced herself, expecting darkness.
Instead, the lights brightened, too bright, bleaching the cabin in a harsh, surgical glare. She shielded her eyes. When she lowered her hand, the cabin had changed. The emergency kit was on the ceiling. The console chair was on the opposite side of the room. The viewport was higher. She blinked hard.
The cabin snapped back to normal. Her breath trembled. She whispered, "You not real." But the room still felt wrong, like it had rearranged itself and then pretended it hadn't. The first physical touch. At 5,700 meters, the tapping returned. Not on the glass, not in her head. On her shoulder, a soft, unmistakable pressure. 2 fingertips resting lightly on her jumpsuit. Mara froze, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't turn. She didn't scream. She whispered, "You're not there." The fingers pressed slightly harder, not painful, not violent, just present. Her skin crawled. She squeezed her eyes shut. The fingers slid down her arm, slow, deliberate, tracing the fabric. She gasped and jerked away, slamming into the console. The lights flickered. The cabin was empty, but her shoulder still tingled where she'd been touched. The hole that bent inward. At 5,500 meters, the hole groaned. Not the usual deep-sea creak. Something sharper, closer. Mara turned toward the sound. A small dent formed in the metal, right beside her head. A perfect circle, as if something were pressing from the outside with a single fingertip. The metal flexed inward. Another dent appeared. Then another. A line of them, tracing the shape of a hand. Mara's breath hitched. She whispered, "Stop. Please stop." The dents deepened. The metal pulsed, as if something were pushing harder, testing the whole strength. Her heart pounded. She reached for the emergency ballast release. The dents vanished. The hole was smooth again. Her hand hovered over the switch. She whispered, "I'm losing it." But the fear in her chest was real. The dents had been real. She knew they had. The reflection that stepped closer. At 5,300 meters, condensation formed again on the viewport. Mara wiped it away. Her reflection stared back, but it wasn't aligned with her movements. She lifted her hand. Her reflection didn't. It stood perfectly still, watching her with a calm, patient expression. Then it stepped closer. Not a reflection, a figure, a silhouette in the dark behind the glass. Mara stumbled backward, hitting the bulkhead. The figure pressed its palm to the glass. A faint, human-shaped smudge appeared. Mara shook her head violently. "You're not real. You're not real."
The figure tilted its head. Then it tapped the glass.
Tap, tap, tap.
Her knees buckled. She whispered, "What are you?" The figure smiled. The condensation cleared. Nothing was there, but the smudge remained.
The physical threat becomes real.
At 5,000 meters, the sonar pinged.
Ping. A return. Not terrain.
Not debris.
A shape.
Large.
Close.
Moving.
Mara stared at the screen, pulse racing. The shape circled the sub.
Slowly. Deliberately.
The tapping resumed, this time louder, sharper, as if whatever was outside was no longer testing the hole, but knocking to be let in. The hole groaned again.
A long, low moan, like metal under strain.
Mara grabbed the console. No, don't you dare. The hull flexed inward. A visible bulge formed in the metal. Something was pushing.
Hard.
Her breath came in ragged gasps. She slammed the thrusters to full power. The sub lurched upward. The bulge receded. The tapping stopped. The sonar shape drifted away. Mara collapsed into the chair, shaking. She whispered, "It's real, it's real, it's real." But another voice inside her whispered, "Or you are." African American, deep. The final fracture. At 4,800 meters, Mara checked the depth gauge.
5,000 M.
5,050 meters. 5,100 meters.
Descending.
Her stomach dropped. She checked the secondary gauge.
Descending.
She checked the tertiary.
Descending.
She checked the sonar. The shape was back. Closer. She whispered, "I'm not getting out." The tapping resumed.
Soft. Patient. Reassuring. As if whatever was outside was telling her,
"You don't need to." Mara closed her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't know whether she wanted to. The hole groaned again.
not the deep, distant creak of pressure. Something closer, more deliberate.
Mara pressed her back against the bulkhead, eyes fixed on the forward viewport. The glass looked normal, smooth, cold, blank, but she could feel something on the other side, watching, waiting, learning. She whispered, "You're not real." But the words felt thin, like paper held against a storm.
The tapping resumed.
Tap, tap, tap.
Soft, measured, patient. She squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them, the tapping stopped, but the glass was fogged again. This time with a shape she recognized instantly. A handprint, human-sized.
Pressed from the outside. Her breath hitched. She whispered, "No." The handprint deepened, the glass bowing inward by a fraction of a millimeter. A physical threat. Not imagined, not internal. Real. The cabin tilts.
At 4,600 meters, the sub lurched sideways. Mara grabbed the console to keep from falling. The cabin tilted at a sharp angle, as if something massive had shoved the vessel from below. The lights flickered, the hull groaned, the sub tilted further. Mara's stomach dropped. She slammed the thrusters to full power. The engines roared, the cabin vibrating violently.
The sub righted itself for a moment. Then it tilted again, harder this time. Something was pushing it, something with intent. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Stop! Stop! Please stop! The sub tilted further, nearly throwing her from her seat. Then it stopped, perfectly still, as if whatever was outside had decided she'd had enough. The voice that wasn't hers. At 4,400 meters, Mara heard breathing. Not her own. Slow, steady, right behind her. She froze. The breath warmed the back of her neck. She didn't turn. She didn't move. She whispered, "You're not real." A voice whispered back. Not through the radio, not through the hull. Inside her mind. I am. Mara's pulse hammered. She pressed her hands to her ears. Get out. Get out.
The voice softened.
You invited me. Her breath caught. No, you listened. Her knees buckled. She slid to the floor, shaking.
The voice exhaled softly, like a sigh of satisfaction.
The physical intrusion. At 4,200 meters, the hole dented again.
This time deeper, sharper.
Like a knuckle pressing into soft metal.
Mara scrambled backward, pressing herself into the corner of the cabin. The dent grew. Another formed beside it. Then another. A line of them, 5 in total. A hand, pressing inward. The metal groaned, bending under the pressure. Mara screamed. Stop! Please, stop! The dents froze, then slowly receded. The hull smoothed. Silence. Mara collapsed to her knees, sobbing. She whispered, "Why are you doing this?"
The voice answered.
To show you. The hallucination that drew blood. At 4,000 meters, Mara felt something brush her ankle. She jerked her leg back, heart pounding.
Nothing there.
She exhaled shakily. Then something grabbed her ankle.
Cold.
Wet. Strong.
She screamed and kicked violently, slamming her heel into the metal floor. The grip tightened. She clawed at her leg, fingers digging into her jumpsuit. Her nails scraped skin. Warmth spread across her ankle.
Blood.
She froze. The grip loosened. She pulled her leg up, trembling. Her ankle was bleeding. 3 small crescent-shaped marks, like fingertips pressed too hard. She whispered, "You're not real." The voice whispered back, "Then why do you bleed?" The final slip. At 3,800 meters, Mara checked the depth gauge. 4,000 meters. 4,050 meters. 4,100 meters.
Descending.
Her stomach twisted. She checked the secondary gauge.
Descending.
She checked the tertiary.
Descending.
She checked the sonar. The shape was back. Closer. She whispered, "I'm not getting out." The tapping resumed.
Soft. Patient.
Reassuring. As if whatever was outside was telling her,
You don't need to. Mara closed her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't know whether she wanted to. The cabin felt colder. Not the mechanical chill of failing systems, a deeper cold. A cold with intention. Mara rubbed her arms, but the warmth didn't return. It felt as though the temperature inside her body had dropped, not the air around her. She whispered, I'm still here. The words fogged in front of her lips. She froze. Her breath had never fogged inside the cabin before. The temperature couldn't be that low. The life support system wouldn't allow it. She exhaled again. A cloud of white mist drifted from her mouth. Her pulse quickened. The cabin was cold enough to freeze breath. Or she was. The shape outside the glass. At 3,600 meters, the sonar pinged. Ping. A return. The shape was closer now, so close it nearly filled the screen. A massive, shifting silhouette with no clear edges, like a shadow cast by something that didn't obey geometry. Mara stared at the display, breath trembling. The shape moved. Not drifting, not floating, circling. The tapping resumed, this time louder, sharper, as if whatever was outside was no longer testing the hole, but knocking to be let in. Tap, tap, tap. The hole groaned. A long, low moan, like metal under strain. Mara grabbed the console. No, don't you dare. The hole flexed inward. A visible bulge formed in the metal. Something was pushing. Hard. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She slammed the thrusters to full power. The sub lurched upward. The bulge receded. The tapping stopped. The sonar shape drifted away. Mara collapsed into the chair, shaking. She whispered, It's real. It's real. It's real. But another voice inside her whispered, Or you are. The cabin that didn't stay still. At 3,400 meters, the cabin lights flickered again. When they steadied, the cabin had changed. The viewport was on the wrong wall. The console chair was facing the opposite direction. The emergency kit was gone entirely. Mara blinked hard. The cabin snapped back to normal. She blinked again. The cabin shifted again, subtle this time, like a painting hung slightly crooked. Her breath trembled. She whispered, Stop moving. The cabin obeyed. For a moment. Then the floor tilted beneath her feet. She stumbled, catching herself on the console. The cabin tilted further. The sub wasn't moving. The instruments showed no change in orientation, but the room was tilting. Her perception was tilting. She pressed her palms to her temples. This isn't real. This isn't. The cabin snapped upright. Her stomach lurched. She wasn't sure if the room had moved or if she had. The voice that used her thoughts. At 3,200 meters, the voice returned. Not through the radio, not through the hull. Inside her mind. You're close. Mara shook her head violently. Get out. You opened the door. No, you listened. Her breath came in sharp, ragged bursts.
Stop talking.
The voice softened. Then stop thinking. Her pulse hammered. She pressed her hands to her ears, as if she could block out a voice that wasn't using sound.
The voice exhaled softly.
You're learning.
The physical threat returns.
At 3,000 meters, the hole dented again.
This time deeper, sharper, like a knuckle pressing into soft metal.
Mara scrambled backward, pressing herself into the corner of the cabin. The dent grew. Another formed beside it. Then another. A line of them, 5 in total. A hand, pressing inward. The metal groaned, bending under the pressure. Mara screamed. Stop! Please, stop! The dents froze, then slowly receded, the hole smoothed.
Silence.
Mara collapsed to her knees, sobbing. She whispered, "Why are you doing this?"
The voice answered.
To show you.
The hallucination that drew blood.
At 2,800 meters, Mara felt something brush her ankle. She jerked her leg back, heart pounding.
Nothing there.
She exhaled shakily. Then something grabbed her ankle.
Cold. Wet.
Strong.
She screamed and kicked violently, slamming her heel into the metal floor. The grip tightened. She clawed at her leg, fingers digging into her jumpsuit. Her nails scraped skin. Warmth spread across her ankle.
Blood.
She froze. The grip loosened. She pulled her leg up, trembling. Her ankle was bleeding. 3 small crescent-shaped marks, like fingertips pressed too hard. She whispered, "You're not real." The voice whispered back, "Then why do you bleed?" The final slip. At 2,600 meters, Mara checked the depth gauge. 3,000 meters. 3,050 meters. 3,100 meters.
Descending.
Her stomach twisted. She checked the secondary gauge.
Descending.
She checked the tertiary.
Descending.
She checked the sonar. The shape was back. Closer, she whispered. "I'm not getting out." The tapping resumed.
Soft, patient, reassuring, as if whatever was outside was telling her, "You don't need to."
Mara closed her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't know whether she wanted to. The tapping stopped. Not gradually, not fading, just gone.
The sudden silence felt heavier than the knocks ever had. Mara sat perfectly still in the center of the cabin, afraid to breathe, afraid to move, afraid to acknowledge the absence. Her ankles still throbbed, her shoulders still tingled, her breath still fogged in the air. She whispered, "Are you still here?" Silence. Then the depth gauge flickered. 2,600 meters, 2,550 meters, 2,500 meters, ascending. For the first time in hours, the numbers made sense.
Mara's breath trembled. Relief washed over her in a wave so sudden it made her dizzy. She gripped the console, grounding herself. "I'm going home." The words felt fragile, like glass. The return of the real. At 2,300 meters, the cabin lights steadied. The hull stopped groaning. The sonar returned clean, empty pings. Pings. Return. Ping. Return. No shapes, no shadows, no circling presence. Just the ocean. Just the world she knew. Her pulse slowed. Her breathing steadied. The cold in her bones began to thaw. She whispered, "It's over." But the words didn't feel true. They felt rehearsed, like something she was supposed to say. The last reflection. At 2,000 meters, condensation formed on the viewport again. Mara hesitated. She wiped it away with her sleeve. Her reflection stared back. Normal. Aligned. Human.
She exhaled shakily. Then her reflection blinked, a fraction of a second too late. Mara froze. Her reflection smiled. She did not. Her breath caught in her throat. The reflection lifted its hand. She didn't move.
The reflection tapped the glass.
Tap.
A single soft knock. Mara stumbled backward, heart hammering. The reflection's smile widened.
Then it faded slowly, like a face sinking beneath water.
The condensation cleared. The glass was empty.
The voice that wasn't a voice.
At 1,800 meters, the voice returned.
Not loud.
Not invasive.
Soft.
Warm.
Close. Almost. Mara pressed her hands to her ears. Stop. You're almost here. Her pulse quickened. I'm going up. You're coming down. She shook her head violently.
No.
You opened the door. Her breath trembled. I didn't. You listened. She squeezed her eyes shut.
Leave me alone. The voice exhaled.
You're not alone. The surface that didn't feel like salvation. At 1,000 meters, the water brightened. Not much, just a faint bluish haze filtering through the viewport. The first hint of sunlight, the first sign of the world above. Mara's chest tightened. She should have felt relief. She should have felt joy. She should have felt anything but dread. But the closer she got to the surface, the more wrong everything felt. The cabin seemed too small, the air too thin, the silence too loud. She whispered, "I don't belong up there." The voice whispered back, "No." Her breath hitched. "I belong down here." Yes. Her pulse slowed. The tapping resumed.
Soft.
Gentle. Reassuring. Tap. Tap. A reply.
The choice that wasn't a choice.
At 500 meters, Mara reached for the ballast controls. Her hand hovered over the switch. One pull would flood the tanks. One pull would send the sub sinking again. One pull would take her back to the only place that felt real. She whispered, "I want to understand."
The voice answered.
"Then come back." Her fingers curled around the lever. She hesitated. A single tear slid down her cheek. "Will it hurt?"
The voice exhaled softly.
Only at first. Mara closed her eyes and pulled.
Epilogue. Recovery log.
Bathurst Vantage was recovered 14 hours later, drifting on the surface with no pilot aboard. The cabin was intact. The hull showed no damage. The instruments were functional. The only anomaly was the viewport. A single handprint.
Human-sized, perfectly formed, pressed from the inside.
Mara Ellison was never found. The audio logs ended with a whisper.
Not hers.
A voice saying, deeper.